All right. So hello and welcome to our latest contract webinar, which is about the role of IRAP in protected level environments for government investigations. So just a little bit about me. My name is Craig Duran. I'm the CEO and founder of Comtrack. Now, before starting Comtrack, I spent about 22 years in law enforcement with the Queensland Police and the Crime and Corruption Commission. Now, I see we have several of our client government agencies joining us today, and quite a few new ones, which is really good to see so many people along. So what we're going to be doing today is talking about the importance of cybersecurity and IRAP within the SaaS space. Now, leading us through today's topics is Brice Neilson. He's a government risk and compliance specialist who has also served as an IRAP assessor. Now, Brice has had extensive experience as a Chief Information Security Officer in the law enforcement and government sectors. Now, he has a really interesting career which ranges from major crimes through to covert policing, as well as serving as a board member on the Queensland Government's Information and Cybersecurity Steering Committee. Okay, so once Brice has been giving us a bit of background in the importance of the space he's been in as a cybersecurity specialist, then what we're going to do is we're going to hand over to Jason Chase. So Jason is the Chief Technology Officer here at Comtrack. So Jason has extensive experience designing and building and managing information systems for government and private sector organisations of all sizes. He's led numerous teams in delivering software solutions across all levels of government, be it federal, state, and local government agencies. So now, as we go through the webinar, please add any questions in the question tab and we'll endeavour to answer them. Now, if we're unable to get to your question during the session, we'll follow up via email very shortly after the webinar. So we'll also stick around at the end of the address as well if there's any remaining questions that people want to ask. So feel free to keep adding them to the question tab on the screen. But to kick this off, I think now I'll hand over to Brice, and Brice will give you a run through of his space.
All right, thanks again, Craig, for the introduction. I'll sort of go over a little bit again, a bit of my background, not to really harp on about myself, although that's what some people would say, but more to sort of show how I got to where we are today and the importance of, or where I've sort of attached the importance of information security from some of the operational roles that I've been in. Generally, sort of when I start talking about information security, when it comes to a government forum or with government sort of attendees, I'll ask, if people know where their cyber threats are or what information security and cybersecurity looks like to them. And a lot of the times you get sort of mixed answers, and a lot of the answers generally sort of come from a space where they don't really know where the threats are or what role they have to play. A lot of the answers come from a place of really high level, sophisticated cyber attacks that are causing, significant damage. When, as you'll see in a moment, we talk about some of the real threats, it's really not that smart or really not that unreachable to cause some serious damage. And I think the other response that we get a lot of the time is a bit of complacency because it's just not achievable to meet, almost 1,000 controls 100% of the time. And that is actually somewhat true, which is why we're probably here today talking about some of the other ways that we can achieve this when that type of requirement is somewhat unachievable. And realistically, that is wrapped up with a general sentiment that vendors, when they're providing a service to government, a software service, they're meant to provide the whole service, and that's end to end, not just the features and the code that does the bits that you want it to do, but the delivery model that not only runs the application, but also secures it as well, as that's a feature in itself. So looking at one other thing to note, and a bit of transparency as well. So as much as I'd love to say I'm impartial and independent of this, while I was impartial as I can be, and as independent as I can be from the process, and of course, audits are audits, and we'll talk about the process in a minute, what Comtrack have gone through and what IRAP assessments look like. I'm still, obviously working with Comtrack on a commercial basis, so I do need to put that out there. Okay, so going back to what we've got up on the screen, this is as recent as what we've got, so this is 2024. The spread of attacks from the general sort of the affected areas, so member of public through to national security, and then the up level is the consequence of the attack. So if we start from the sort of bottom left-hand corner, members of public and unsuccessful low malicious attack, right through to the top right-hand corner, where you're looking at national security, sustained disruption. So that's like a persistent cyber attack, which we haven't seen any of those. Based on the anticipated audits here, and what I can see, most people are sitting in the concerning area in this table, which is around the table C6, the 360, which is that government shared services regulated critical infrastructure, federal government, and the unsuccessful low attacks, which is the one that really causes the harm, and I'll come to why that is in a minute, even though they're not successful. And then moving up into 95 when it's low-level malicious attacks, and then we've got the number one there in orange, almost on the top right, which is the one we're really concerned about. And so I'll sort of go through that pillar in a moment, but where this is super important to understand is the auxiliary roles non-government agencies play. So you've got their regulated critical infrastructure. This isn't just for state, local and federal government. This is for our finance sector. This is for auxiliary health providers that aren't government providers. Everybody has a role to play if they're handling sensitive information that could lead to the compromise of what we call protected information, which we'll come to a bit later as to where this all sort of fits in. So showing that hopefully gives you an understanding of sort of where you sit in there. I'd say most people listening to this today sit within that right middle quadrant, and then the scary one in the orange up the top. Now, coming back to what people normally answer when we talk about what the threat is to them, it's the unknown. When we get down to it, it's the unknown threat to them, but they can answer what they've seen in the news. So we all see the newspapers talking about the millions of people that are impacted by, isolated attacks, generally media-led, onto who they're going to report on that day. And a lot of the times, if they can dig their heels into government, they will, but also those industries that are regulated and sort of auxiliary protected providers like Medibank, who are holding a lot of the public's sensitive health information and also financial information as well. And so it comes back to its unknown, the actual risk to an agency. We go a little bit further, we start talking again about the financial and operational impacts. We've still got an unknown, but we're still reading about what the consequences are, which is $4.8 million, roughly, around average cost of a data breach. That's spread across all the industries and all the sectors when we sort of even it out. 292 days to identify, and that's concerning, and contain breaches. A lot of the times we don't know that it's happened to us, which means a lot of the times it's unreported, and so these figures are probably on the lower end of the reporting spectrum. 46% involve personal data. Obviously, that's our core job really is to protect the public. A lot of the government agencies' core jobs or charter is to protect the public or protect property and all those types of things. If we're leaking sensitive data or if we're not protecting sensitive data, we're not sort of meeting that mission, mission's core principle. So we need to sort of tie that back into our priorities as well, but also our realities. And the organisation facing critical cyber skills shortage at 53%. To be honest with you, that's probably not a shortage. It's probably just, again, flipping that expectation around. Should the organisation have that skill that skill set, or should we be looking at our vendors to provide a more holistic service offering? So again, just another way of looking at this before we get into the actual real statistics around cyber and the real reason potentially why we see some of these incidents occurring day in, day out. Just another visual of sort of where cyber attacks sort of tend to land. And if you look at the sort of the themes as we go through some of these statistics, you're seeing where potentially cyber attackers are looking at when they're sort of planning and carrying out an attack. So health obviously is the most significant when it comes to being subject to the cyber attack. Health records are obviously extremely valuable when it comes to, it basically contains everything. Health records generally contain a lot of financial information as well. So if we're doing identity theft, it's all there. But ransom is a big one. So people's health records going onto the black market and being sold. Being sold to pharmaceutical companies, being sold to advertising companies, being sold to, unscrupulous actors as well when it comes to ransom, flat out ransom. Health is basically a gold mine for them. But second to that is obviously the government, because the data spread is so vast. You've got police agencies holding a certain valuable and protected set of information. You've got people like the ACCC are holding significant financial, and ATO as well, significant financial information. The spread is so large. So government attacks are generally seen as sort of fishing expeditions. They can get a broad sweeping brush. And then you sort of go down to finance. Finance we see a lot lower these days because of the controls that they've put in place. They know they're under attack, and it's not information they might just only get from the finance, they might get some money as well. So they've put a lot of controls in there. We've seen a decrease. Education, again, for the same reasons, health, very high value information to a cyber attacker. And retail, the retail ones are still pretty high, but only because it is the sort of crimes like identity theft and credit card stealing and those types of things to go and purchase some high value items. But when we actually get into some of the real reasons, without all the actual the sort of those statistical percentage statistics, we start to look at why it's happening, and it's actually a pretty easy explanation as to why we're sort of seeing this, and why we're seeing only some vendors now providing an end-to-end service when it comes to cybersecurity. And it actually comes back to cost of customer acquisition, and it's a pretty easy explanation when we think about it. So these are rough figures based on 2024 survey in relation to what it costs a software vendor to acquire a customer, and whilst it's not on the screen, versus the reward. And so generally the cost of onboarding a new customer in the government is around $50,000 as we go through the procurement process and onboarding and basically getting through that probity cycle of being here. And as we can appreciate, the total addressable market in the government is fairly low, so we're spending a lot of money for a fairly low return when it comes to the size of that government market. And then we have enterprise, or just the general business-to-business space, which has a lower cost of acquisition, the $32,000, but massive addressable market. So once you're in there, once you've spent the money, the likelihood of actually getting that customer, being that they don't have that sort of heightened probity, is a lot more rewarding. So likelihood of paying that $32,000 or justifying it is higher. And then the consumer space is easy. $1,200 to onboard a customer. There's billions. And this is where we're sort of seeing, the SaaS industry going. The SaaS industry has grown 11% or even more, I think, year on year, but targeted towards to the consumer market. What's going on the iPhone, what's going on the TV's operating system, for example, because it's such an inexpensive way to release technology, and also at the rate technology is advancing, keeping up with that consumer technology. You obviously have to be quick, which means generally the tail that's sort of following the technology is going to be a little untidy from a security space. Doesn't matter consumers, but this is why we're not seeing people motivated to sort of take that leap in the government space for not a great reward. And this is where we see two things: shortcuts in people providing government software solutions, and those shortcuts eventually inevitably become the government customer's problem to patch those shortcuts from a security standpoint, and basically take on that burden of risk and the cost. And if we're not taking shortcuts, we're seeing a smaller pool of vendors who are providing a end-to-end solution. Pleased to say Contractor are one of that small pool of vendors in Australia that are providing that solution worldwide. But when we look at the contracts versus the Apples, or the contracts versus the IBMs, for example, you will see a dramatic difference in their service proposition when it comes to the security and their end-to-end offering. Okay, so we'll talk about the statistical cost, the financial cost, and then operational consequence. But a lot of people probably want to think that there's a general sort of sentiment that is it going to really happen to us, or what does it really look like when somebody sort of does a cyber attack against us? And if you strip everything really back and you look at the most probable sort of breach and the probable consequence, it's as simple as really sort of painting the picture with a law enforcement agency is a good way to picture it, and sort of turning people's heads to what a cyber attack really looks like, and then jumping back to what this actually looks like in operation. So the true cost, can it really happen? Yes. Could it happen to your agency? I'd say so. And do you imagine it starting with a traffic stop? Probably not. But if we run through it, so this is based off a real story, and this is what we would consider a cyber attack that is likely and has high consequence that people just don't think about. When police intercept a vehicle, excuse me, I'll have a quick drink. Thank you. Police go to intercept a vehicle, and the occupant of the vehicle is a respondent in a domestic violence relationship, and the respondent is unlicensed. So the police are doing their thing. They're talking to the driver and processing the driver's license notice to appear in court. And as the police officer are preparing their paperwork and the notice to appear in court for the driver's license matter, they've got their police issue iPad on the front of the defendant's car, or the front of the suspect's car, and on the front of the suspect's, or sorry, the page of the iPad is a warning that they're in a domestic violence relationship with a so-and-so name, who lives at this address. People would not see that as a cyber breach and a cyber attack, but realistically is the most likely cyber attack and the most consequential one. People don't associate that as a cyber attack because it's happening right in front of them. It's not, someone sitting behind a computer and breaching like a hacker. But realistically, those types of breaches where a police officer is leaving sensitive information in plain sight to a suspect, breaching at a defendant's, an aggrieved's address, so that person may go and cause harm to that person, having not been able to, previously not knowing the address. That is what we consider a really high consequence and likely breach. Where software vendors and programs like IRAP, as we'll come to a second, focus on are those really operational cyber attacks like that. Should the police officer be able to leave their iPad on that car with the screen just sort of, in full light, showing everybody everything without sort of turning off within 30 seconds of inactivity? That's a control. Should a police officer be able to, swipe between apps as they're sort of maybe showing a defendant something to get the version or whatever, and as they're swiping through different apps on their iPad, it shows up a protected application they might not be showing as they're scrolling through and just getting that glance of an address. It's those really little things, those controls that we don't look at, but they are so obvious. But the reason why I don't look at them is because there's so many. So there's so many ways that those little situations can come unstuck, and there is so many controls to implement to stop them from happening. And if you try and implement every one of those controls for every one of those scenarios across your whole technology stack, you're not going to get it done. And that's where we see this overwhelming sort of look at where we fit and how many controls we put in, where, what is the real consequence, and then people end up just, dropping the bundle and not doing anything. But what we look at for those types of incidents is the sheer volume of them, of those unsuccessful low-level malicious attacks in that space, and then that one attack that is successful. It is absolutely not sophisticated, absolutely doesn't cost anything, it absolutely could be prevented, and it absolutely is going to end up on the front page of the news. And we don't really care about the news, we care about that one person who has potentially lost their life because someone has just left an iPad open, trying to do their job, hasn't even thought about it, because we probably haven't thought about it, and that person is now, unfortunately, another statistic in what is something that we don't think about, a risk in cybersecurity. So this is why, whilst I am not exactly impartial to this, to contract commitment to here, or to contract, I should say, I can say that everybody here listening to this, and the fact that our contract have gone through the IRAP process and what this process has led them down to give you an end-to-end offering, you should see the value in it from twofold. The fact that you've got a responsible vendor who is proactively undertaken to go through a service. They have taken the risk off your hand, and a risk that you simply cannot manage for reasons that we've gone through. And ultimately, contract is setting the bar for your other vendors who really have to step up if they're going against them in a tender process or a competitive process. The more vendors that we actually have going through this process, the better from a competitive land space, as we start to see everybody lift their game from security. I liken it back to, and before I go into some of the technical stuff, I liken it back to, if you're buying a new fleet of cars in the police, or a government agency, and they sold you a fleet of cars that have no warranty and no service, would you buy it? No, you wouldn't, because it's absurd. But that's because we think about it. There's no difference between those fleets providing you warranty and a service program as to contract providing end value proposition when it comes to their security regime and the full service they're offering to you. But unfortunately, what we see is service providers falling short at the end there and not providing that security platform because it's hard and costs a lot of money, as we're about to see. And the government either doing one of two things: not doing it themselves, or doing it themselves in a way that takes away from them doing their core business. And either way you look at it, it's bad. So the IRAP program itself, from a technical perspective, is a little bit of a notch up to the Essential 8 program, which is the 8 core sort of fundamental things that we need to do to secure our workloads. I wanted to touch on the Essential 8 really quickly, just because it is probably something you've heard more commonly than IRAP, as Essential 8 is becoming more prominent in the government space as the bare essentials that you have to do to secure a workload. What I will say is, this applies to contract and everybody else who's gone through an IRAP process, that if you have met the controls of IRAP, or the ISM, Information Security Manual, then, and they're effective controls, then you have met the controls of the Essential 8. So you can be assured that that vendor has complied and met with the Essential 8 controls, in addition to the heightened ISM protected controls. And then as you expand on those controls to go to protected ISM, not just Essential 8, you'll just see that there are more controls sitting in those same 8 domains to increase the security. And so where it sort of fits, and this Essential 8 applies to this as well, but where IRAP sort of fits within the more the more grand policy framework, or the overarching policy framework, is it starts with a protective security policy framework. That is a set of policies, rules, definitions, and those types of things that allow agencies and its employees, or the custodians of data, to assess a piece of data, or assess a piece of information, or assess it down to an individual document, the nature and classification of that document from a risk and consequence standpoint. And then when it comes to labeling documentation, you've got sort of unofficial, official, sensitive, protected, secret, top secret, and then we've got a few more that go on top of that in relation to Australian eyes only, Australian government eyes only, etc. We'll focus on protected because realistically it's very hard for a cloud service provider without significant collaboration with a particular customer to achieve secret and above. But if anybody wants to talk about that specifically, we can offline. But from protected, which is sort of where most vendors will strive to achieve a protected assurance for you, so you can inherit those controls and move forward with that assurance. Most vendors will stick at that protected line. So if a document is classified as protected, it means that it's probably got a significant risk to life or property, and it could be likely or possible that would happen. So we're going back to the police officer with the iPad on the front of the car situation. You could argue very strongly, especially when it goes bad, anybody would argue that that is a protected piece of information because the consequence is to life or property, and it could very well happen. So we should be treating that information with a bit more care, and realistically, through some of those ways I talked about before, like shutting the screen off or locking the iPad with inactivity, it can be pretty easily done. So once we've classified our documents, we've got the Information Security Manual, which then is the 982 controls, which shows us how to secure those documents depending on their classification. So there's obviously more controls that apply protected than there is to official sensitive, and then to official and unofficial, but still there is a baseline set of controls for all, and then it sort of tiers up and scales up as the information becomes more consequential and more likely to be compromised or subject of an attack. Then you've got the IRAP program that assesses the effectiveness of those controls. And that IRAP program is what the vendors like Contract submit to or have submitted to make sure that they're handling those controls as per, those documents or information as per the controls, and also documenting that so that it can be inherited by an organisation like yourselves as implemented, and effectively every control that a vendor brings to you as documented effective is a control that you don't have to look at. You just need to read it, make sure it's done by an IRAP assessor, and make sure it's gone through the actual process. Inherit those controls, satisfy yourselves that it's done, sign it off. I'll go through that process in a minute. But the alternative is, if those controls aren't looked at and aren't met, every single control is on you. So generally what the process is, let's just say you're looking yourselves to implement a program that hasn't been subject to the IRAP process. You're going to define the system, so you're going to see which data it's having touch points with and where its boundaries are. Which security controls are applicable to that, so that it'll come down to, is it protected information, or is it only official sensitive, or is it official only? And you'll see which of those 982 controls, 982 I think, yeah, are relevant to your particular system that you're looking at there. Then it's implementing the system security controls, which may be like the screen lock thing that we talked about with the iPad, and then assessing the security controls through the IRAP process. Oh. Yep, through the IRAP process, and that's, as we've talked about. Oh. Yep, through the IRAP process, and that's, as we've talked about, through that independent assessment or through inheriting the controls from a cloud service provider. And then we're looking at authorizing the system, which I'm going to come back to in a second, because this is hopefully where we want to get to, with vendors bringing you the controls for you to inherit and authorize. And then effectively going through that cycle again, monitoring the system, identifying additional risks or controls that need to be implemented, implementing, assessing it, and through we go. So from an assessment point of view, phase one is hopefully you've gone through that cycle once and you've implemented the controls effectively. An IRAP assessor will look at those controls and evidence them, test them, make sure they're actually enforceable and they're actually doing their job. Then you've got the second phase, which is the actual going through and evidencing that if there is inherited controls from a cloud service provider, for example, like contract case, there may be instances where controls are inherited from Microsoft Azure, when they've been subject to an IRAP assessment, and they're inheriting those controls from Microsoft Azure to pass on to you, by proxy. And then once all the controls are sort of met that are in scope as effective, we pass that on to the cloud consumer, which would be the government agencies, in this case, yourselves, and the cloud services report or cloud security report and cloud services matrix, which I'll come to in a minute, gets to the authorizing officer. So if a software vendor hasn't gone through these processes and hasn't prepared control statements for the 982 controls and have them tested as effective, that's something an agency has to do themselves to get it to here, and then giving it to your Chief Information Security Officer to sign off. Once it's gone to the Chief Information Security Officer, they will effectively assess the controls, make sure they're happy with it and satisfied themselves that the controls are met and the risk is mitigated. Then you can authorize the solution as a protected solution or an IRAP authorized solution. So there's a bit of a misconception that once an IRAP assessment has been done, that's protected stamped. The one little misconception is there that each solution needs to be assessed by the information security representative of an agency, generally the CISO, who then assess it as protected once they've read the material or once the agency have gone through the process themselves. So rather than doing all of that, what we want to do is get it to the point where cloud service providers like Comtrack and others are producing the cloud authorization package. So the cloud services report and the cloud security controls matrix to you through either the tender process or the sales process, regardless, and effectively having that immediate readiness, control readiness for the cloud authorization package to go straight to the CISO. The CISO satisfies themselves that the controls are implemented and met, and signing it off. And that should obviously be a very, very quick process and an inexpensive, if not free process, given that the cloud service provider, e.g. Contract, have done it for you. There may be cases where additional controls are required based on agency-specific need. However, that is obviously far less than fair lot less than undertaking the process themselves. And what that looks like in principle for contract and where it is scary from where we started is that the requirements moved during our talk this morning. And so looking at contract controls that were last assessed and continually assessed, 520 were effective in securing the risk. 206 were either inherited controls from the cloud service provider of Azure or others, or marked not applicable because it's secret and above. And the rest, I don't know why it can't be seen there as to what is said under this, but the rest are 0 ineffective controls, 0 not mitigated, 0 not addressed, that type of thing. So there's no unmitigated controls in the contract package. But if anybody's picked it up, 520 plus 206 does not equate to 982. So concerningly, or expectedly, I should say, the amount of controls increase significantly each 3 months. Every 3 months, every 6 months, you'll generally see an increase every half a year, but certainly every year you'd see about 50 controls added is what we're seeing at the moment. And so bringing straight back to my final point, before any questions later, obviously, bringing back to, sort of where we started off, can an agency be reasonably expected to maintain their own IRAP program? Absolutely not, especially if they can do it properly. Because where we've seen agencies do it themselves, they'll get the 982 controls or whatever many controls there were at the time, they high five, champagne comes out, and by the time they finish that last drink, there's more controls to assess, and they just don't have the budget, they just don't have the people, and it is not in the charter. Lazy vendors, now, I should say now, they've all had a chance. Anybody that is not doing it now and can do it are lazy, and we need to get our vendors to be really pushing it up and providing an end-to-end service to the government. It's not for question anymore, and realistically, a solution is a solution, and that includes the features of security. So hopefully that has given some sort of real life, operational impacts of what the IRAP program can achieve, but also just shone some light on what cybersecurity looks like and the nature of risk looks like in government at the moment. Thank you, Craig. What Jason have we got?
All right, excellent. Thanks for that, Brice. That was a really big insight into the IRAP security controls. We see a lot of our clients coming across one by one to an IRAP environment. We've put that on offering about 2 years ago when it was getting more and more important for agencies. So it's good to see people are moving to an IRAP environment prior to like some sort of some major risk actually occurring as well. So I'm just going to invite Jason in to talk about the strategy for IRAP, and I'll hand it over to you, Jace.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about how we write secure software at contract. So again, thanks, Brice, for the overview in the IRAP context. So I'm going to talk about security by design. So it's a key strategy for us for our IRAP assessment. So what does that mean? So a key aspect for us is shifting left on security. So shifting left means moving security earlier in the software development lifecycle. So instead of it being a late stage activity, it's got to become a key part of every phase from requirements to deployment. So there's a visual here that provides a nice overview where traditionally, if you look at the quality model in pretty much any development methodology you'll use, whether it's Scrum, Sprints, Kanban, you tend to leave the QA side to the back half of the delivery cycle. So you can see in the test, deploy and release phases, that typically is where most vendors spend most of their time looking for security issues, running their internal pen tests, running their external pen tests. Whereas shifting left, what you do is you bring those activities back into the planning and design phase and also into the development and build phase. So the net effect of that is that you can see on the left there that the activities grow in the left side of the screen where you're spending more time doing these up front, and you can see you build a long tail on the right where you have to do less activity to remediate any issues found during security testing, and you have less rework cycles that you end up going through. So what are the benefits of shifting left? So key to this is, as I just mentioned, fewer late stage surprises and less rework. You tend to fix the key issues early, which is much cheaper when building software. You build a security conscious culture that improves overall software quality. And development, security and operations teams, they work together from the start. So this ultimately reduces risks of security threats, being more proactive in your design and identification before you end up shipping your features. So what are some of the key strategies that we use at Contract to do this? So number one on the left, you can see threat modeling, where you identify your potential issues and vulnerabilities during the design phase. So again, it's that shift left where you bring security experts into the designing and planning of the product feature. Using static code analysis tools is key. Specifically, the static application security testing tools. One such tool that we use here is SonarQube, which can identify the OWASP top 10 security issues during that developer coding, build and deployment cycles through test environments. So again, what you're doing is you're picking up on these key issues before they reach the release phase and reach our customers. Automated testing. I think that it's key that we build our own internal security testing capabilities. So you should be running your own internal pen tests before it hits the external vendor that will certify the software against that penetration test. Again, the benefits are you're finding out these issues before they reach third parties, vendors, customers, agencies, and so forth. Another key aspect for us is developer training. So it's key to keep the developers up to date with the latest issues, trends in the security industry, sending them on training courses, having internal technical sessions. Every Friday we have a key session where we have guest speakers or subject matter experts discuss for 1 hour with the team latest issues in security and best practice in software design. And finally, security champions. So again, this is about embedding that security expertise throughout all aspects of the software development lifecycle. And I can't stress enough the importance of that. If you bring that thinking back into the design phase, excuse me, then what you're doing is you're building your software with these security issues in mind, which means you're mitigating them before they hit your customers. So that's a key part of the success for us. And that's it.
All right, so thanks, Jason, and thank you, Brice. So I guess the overall message here is that for organisations and government agencies that rely on third-party vendors for the critical IT infrastructure and services, you have to partner with vendors who offer IRAP protected environments because it brings clear advantages. Now, these vendors will adhere to the consistent and the rigorous standards, ensuring the reliability and trustworthiness and compliance with the government security requirements. Okay, so another important consideration is, of course, the total cost of ownership for the agency as well. So while the upfront investment in protected level environments might be a bit higher, but the long-term security benefits, including reduced risk, enhanced compliance and operational resilience, can obviously lower the overall total cost of ownership over time. And finally, security is not a one-time effort. So working with the right vendors ensures continuous support, proactive updates, and ongoing improvements to those security measures, and helping organisations always stay ahead of these emerging threats. Okay, so thank you all for joining us today. We plan to host a few more of these webinars for our customers in the wider investigation community. So if you have any sort of topics you'd like us to cover, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll stay around at the end and answer any questions. So please keep adding them to the question tab on the screen, and we will be able to get onto your question, and we will follow up with you after the webinar via email.